Have you ever had a moment in your life when you felt as if you were walking like a hermit through a sky thick with fog? You keep moving forward, cutting through thin veils of white mist, and the only thing beside you is a guiding lamp with a faint, flickering light. There is no one there to say, "You're going the right way," and no one left to lend you strength with motivational lines like, "Keep trying and keep going." I know you call that situation loneliness, a lack of will to live. But what if I told you that it is precisely in that solitude that another kind of strength has begun to form? Carl Jung once said that people do not mature in the moment they are understood, but in the moment they must stay with themselves. The moment you learn to cross mountains alone, to cross rivers alone, is also the moment you open a channel to the inner power that has been hidden deep within you. And then, as if by a fortunate karmic thread, today's video was born for you. A solitary soul, learning how to stand firmly on your own 2 feet. If you are ready, we will go through these profoundly valuable lessons through the psychological lens of Carl Jung, and then realize this: everything you have been struggling to search for has long been inside your soul, only waiting for you to recognize it and call it by name. Number 1. Accepting loneliness. Have you ever wondered, why is it that as we grow up, we often feel lonelier? When we are young, we live under the shelter of family and familiar relationships, rarely needing to decide for ourselves or take responsibility for our lives. But when we mature, we step into the world, forced to choose, to bear the consequences, and gradually realize that there will not always be someone who understands or stays beside us. But if you look deeper, loneliness is not a sentence handed down to your inner world. It is not necessarily a rupture. It is a stage of restructuring yourself from within. From Carl Jung's perspective, this is not a stage where people seek recognition, but a stage where people separate from external support in order to form support from within. Jung called this process the night sea journey. The night sea does not symbolize being abandoned, but symbolizes a psychological state in which you no longer have a familiar anchor. You must observe yourself, navigate yourself, and take responsibility for every step you take. In today's neuroscience, people have found that when someone temporarily withdraws from continuous social stimulation, the brain shifts into the default mode network, the network that processes the inner world. This is when the brain begins to review memories, emotions, identity, and the meaning of life. In other words, when you are alone long enough, the brain is forced to turn inward to answer the question, "Who am I?" This explains why loneliness often comes with an inner crisis, yet is also the prerequisite for psychological growth. At this stage, the persona no longer plays the central role, but not because you want to be yourself in front of others, rather because there is no one left for you to perform for. You do not need to appear strong, and you do not need to prove anything. You only need to survive today, complete what needs to be done, and keep yourself from collapsing. And that very stripping down brings you into direct contact with your true capability. There is something very important in Jung's idea of the night sea journey. No one can walk it for you. This is not a journey to be understood, but a journey to learn how to hold yourself up. You realize that even without encouragement, you can still continue. Even without anyone to lead the way, you can still take small steps. And those small steps, over time, create a foundation stronger than any temporary support. Jung once said, The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And one day you will realize that walking alone is not as frightening as facing the truth. No one can live your life for you. When you accept that, you stop waiting for someone to appear and save you. You begin to ask, what do I need to do so I don't collapse? What do I need to adjust so I can keep going more steadily? In a therapy session I once attended, I still remember a divorced woman sharing that after the divorce, she was very sad and cried a lot. Thanks to the comfort of friends and family around her, those feelings dissolved in an instant. But everyone has their own life, and no one can worry about her emotions for the rest of her life. So when the room once crowded with advice and consolation gradually emptied, she was forced to return to herself. She told everyone in the therapy session that she read books, wrote journals, named her pains, and what she did was face the loneliness inside herself rather than run away. So she felt her current life had become more stable. She said, "I love this sense of independence because I now truly know what I want and what I live for." That was the moment Jung called the encounter with the self, the place where you begin to return and be honest with your inner world. Learning to walk on your own 2 feet does not mean becoming cold or closed off. It is when you no longer fall apart simply because you lack a hand to hold you up. You can be tired, you can be sad, you can slow down, but you do not lose the ability to stand back up. And when one day someone walks up beside you, they are not a crutch, but a companion. Loneliness in this spirit is not something to rush to heal. It is a necessary lesson for learning how to bear your own weight. And when you can do that, you no longer fear having no one beside you, because you know you can still keep going. If you are listening to this and suddenly realize you are also in such a season of loneliness, lonely because no one is walking beside you on this journey, leave a small signal below. You do not need to tell a long story, just write one honest line. What are you learning when you have to walk alone? It could be a fear, a lesson, or simply a shaky feeling you cannot yet name. Perhaps your experience will help someone else out there feel less confused on the road they are walking. And if you are not ready to share, just type the number 1 in the comments as a way of admitting to yourself, "I am here, and I am learning to stand firm." When you dare to look loneliness straight in the eye, you will see it does not kill you the way you once feared. It only exposes a truth. There are stretches of road no one can walk in your place. But right at that moment, a very familiar trap is waiting. It is when we begin to tell and retell the story of how unfair life has been, as if the more we talk, the lighter the pain will become. And that is when we need to learn the second lesson. Number 2, stop complaining. In many different situations, complaining is considered a way for us to release the negative energy accumulating inside us. We speak in order to feel lighter, to be understood, to feel less alone. But if you observe closely, prolonged complaining often stops being shared. It becomes a language of living, a habitual way of thinking, where a person repeats the same message. I no longer have the strength to keep walking on my own. And that is exactly when the victim self begins to take the wheel of your life. From Carl Jung's perspective, the danger of the victim mindset does not lie in the fact that you were hurt. Jung does not deny pain. What he warns is this: When a person identifies themselves with the wound, they no longer look at life through the eyes of someone living, but through the eyes of someone being harmed. From there, they need a perpetrator to explain every blockage: society, family, an ex-lover, colleagues, fate. Responsibility turns into a burden, choice turns into a luxury, and life is gradually retold like an indictment. Complaining is how the ego protects itself. It helps us avoid a much harder question: so what will I do next? Because as long as you complain, you remain in the position of victim. You do not need to change. You only need to prove you are right. You do not need to move forward. You only need others to acknowledge that your life is unfair. But that very rightness is the trap. It keeps you standing still while time continues to move. Jung called an important part of maturation the confrontation with the shadow, the parts of us we reject: weakness, jealousy, laziness, fear of responsibility, fear of failure. The victim mindset often comes with a familiar mechanism: projection. We push our shadow outward and see it as the cause of all problems. I failed because they played dirty. I can't change because circumstances won't allow it. Those things may be partly true, but when you stop there, you have unknowingly handed the key to your life to someone else. Complaining, therefore, is not only speech, it is a psychological choice. Choosing the feeling of being blameless instead of choosing the capacity to decide based on yourself. And the cost of that choice is that you will become more and more drained. Because nothing exhausts a person faster than living a life in which they have no power to intervene. You may be right, but you are no longer free. You may be pitied, but you are no longer strong. Jung once made a very sharp remark: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Complaining is one such unconscious pattern. It makes you believe that life is doing something to you, while in reality, you are pulling your own hand away from your power to choose. The victim self is very good at personifying pain. It whispers that pain is a fragile creature that needs protection, that if you stop telling its story, you will betray yourself. But the truth is the opposite. Pain does not need you to speak for it. It needs you to keep moving. When you keep holding it and lamenting, you unintentionally keep it with you longer than necessary. Stopping complaints does not mean swallowing your emotions or forcing yourself to look fine when you are still shaken inside. It means you are quietly changing how you name your experience. When you are no longer trapped in the question, "Why does this keep happening to me?" and instead begin to ask, "In this situation, what part is still within my capacity to handle?" Then in that very moment, the position of the victim self begins to retreat, making room for a more mature self to step up and take control. And the first thing you feel after that change is not happiness or relief, but a very real heaviness, because responsibility is always heavier than blame. But that heaviness is precisely the sign that you have returned to your rightful place, the place of the one holding the wheel. From here, you begin doing small but real things in daily life, learning to set boundaries, adjusting a habit that has exhausted you, strengthening a necessary skill, leaving a toxic environment, or simply accepting the truth in order to keep going. These changes are rarely loud or instantly impressive, but little by little, they return to you the most important thing: the right to live your own life, instead of merely reacting to whatever life throws at you. A viewer of the channel once shared that she was betrayed by her best friend, and for many months, that story became the first thing she thought of every morning and the last thing she repeated whenever she talked to anyone. At first, retelling it made her feel defended, acknowledged as someone who was hurt. But the longer it went on, the more she realized she was growing exhausted, as if her life was being slowed down by that very story. She said the other person had continued living normally while she remained still, repeating the same bitterness every day. Only when she asked herself a very different question, "What can I do to ease this anger?" did things begin to shift. She stopped lamenting, stopped seeking empathy, and instead set boundaries for herself, cut down conversations revolving around old wounds, trained herself. Life is not always fair, and that can break your heart for a moment. But as you become more psychologically mature, you learn to stop letting those injustices decide how you live. You may have been hurt, but you do not need to carry the role of a wounded person for the rest of your life. A crisis may happen to you, but it cannot shape and transform who you are. When you stop complaining, in truth, you stop seeing yourself as powerless and begin giving yourself back the right to choose, the right to steer the boat of your own life. And when you no longer let the past define you, a very real space will appear. It is not a frightening emptiness, but the moment you realize, if you no longer blame circumstances and no longer wait for someone to come save you, then the next question must arise. So who will stay with you in your weakest moments? When there is no longer complaining to cling to, when there is no longer a victim story to tell yourself, you stand before a basic skill you were never taught: the ability to hold yourself, soothe yourself, and become support for your own soul. And that is when we must step into a deeper lesson. Number 3, learning how to comfort yourself. There is a truth that, when we are young, we rarely notice. Life does not always give us someone to lean on at the exact moment we need it most. There are days when you are so tired you do not want to talk. There are evenings when you only want to hear someone say a very simple sentence: "Today was hard." But the phone is silent. The message does not come. And you suddenly understand that from now on, there will be stretches of road where you must soothe yourself. When we are small, our sense of safety comes from the outside: an embrace, a voice, a presence. As we grow up, we still carry that need, but circumstances change. Other people have their own lives. They are not always there. And if we do not learn to comfort ourselves, we will live in a constant state of lack, even if we are not truly alone. We can be among many people and still feel empty, because the one source of support we need right now has never been built: support from within. From Carl Jung's perspective, self-comfort is an essential part of psychological maturation. When people step out of emotional dependence on others, they do not become cold, they become steadier. Jung believed that at a certain stage, each person must learn to return to themselves, to establish an inner relationship stable enough that they do not collapse simply because external presence is missing. This is not self-isolation, but self-steadiness. Self-comfort is not telling yourself positive words just to get it over with. It is not "everything will be fine" or "stop thinking." On the contrary, self-comfort begins with a very honest acknowledgement: I am tired, I am overloaded, I need rest. Like someone who knows to stop in the middle of a long journey to drink water, instead of forcing themselves to keep walking until they are exhausted. That comfort does not solve the problem immediately, but it helps you not run out of life energy before you can find a direction. Imagine you're carrying a backpack that is too heavy. If no one helps you, the only choice to keep going is not to complain, but to learn to reorganize your load. Put down what is unnecessary, adjust how you walk. Self-comfort is the same. It helps you reduce your inner burden, so your remaining strength is used in the right place. I once met someone who worked in a high-pressure environment. Whenever something did not go his way, he had the habit of blaming himself, forcing himself to be stronger, to endure. As a result, he burned out very quickly. Later, he practiced one very small thing. Every night before sleep, he asked himself a single question. Where did I try today? Some days the answer was only, I didn't give up. But that answer helped him feel he was not completely alone in his own life. He still had pressure, but it no longer crushed him. Carl Jung once emphasized that people truly mature only when they no longer seek salvation from outside, but build a firm inner world within. Self-comfort is how you create strength for that inner world. When you know how to pause, listen to yourself, and care for your emotions, you no longer panic each time life turns harsh. You know that no matter how hard today is, there is still a part of you lucid enough to keep you here. Learning to comfort yourself does not make you weaker. It makes you more resilient than ever. You no longer need someone to appear immediately to save you from exhaustion. And when one day someone enters your life, they are not the only place you can lean on. They are only a parallel point of support, beside an inner world that has become sturdy through the lesson of knowing how to soothe the pain in your heart. Knowing how to comfort yourself helps you stand firmly on your own feet, because there are pains only you truly understand, and only you can be the safest harbor for your own soul. But life does not only need you to exist by comforting yourself whenever you stumble. Life needs you to keep moving forward. And to move forward steadily, you must do the hardest thing, not only carrying pain through the day, but also turning it into motivation to continue your path. Number 4. Transforming pain into inner drive. Each of us carries our own pain. Some suffer from loss, some from failure. Most of that pain does not defeat us immediately. It lingers, quietly slipping into each thought, each small decision. We still live, still move forward, but inside there is always a feeling, as if we are carrying a heavy weight we cannot set down right away. From Carl Jung's perspective, pain has never been a psychological accident. It is an inevitable part of each person's maturation. Therefore, the issue is not whether we hurt or not, but what we do with that pain. When people only try to avoid, numb, or deny suffering, they get stuck in an outdated psychological structure. But when they are brave enough to stay, observe, and converse with pain, the locked energy begins to be released. As Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." What happened cannot be changed, but the way you continue living with that experience is where your new form begins to take shape. I want you to pause and imagine for a moment the image of a phoenix burying itself in fire and then being reborn brilliantly from the ashes. The phoenix is not reborn because it avoids the fire, but because it dares to fly straight into it. The old body is burned away, everything familiar disappears in pain, yet from the ashes, another form appears, stronger, more suited to the next cycle of life. Human pain is the same. It burns away what is no longer necessary: illusions, dependence, unrealistic expectations. If you try to hold on to what is burning, you will only be burned. But if you accept their dissolution, pain can become a harsh but necessary gift, the gift that has shaped who you are today. Yes, perhaps it is time we look at the word pain differently. I hope you believe and remember that pain is not a scar you must hide, nor a mistake you must erase, but a raw material that has silently molded the person you are today. Without stumbles and exhaustion, we would not know where our true limits are. Without wounds, we would never be forced to look deep inside and ask, "Who am I when everything outside collapses?" I once met someone after a major breakdown in his career. At first, what he felt most clearly was humiliation and emptiness. Everything he once clung to, titles, position, recognition, was gone. But when there was no road back, he was forced to ask a very honest question. If everything has already fallen apart, what do I still have to lose? That question did not bring hope immediately, but it opened another direction. He began again from small things, no longer pressured to prove who he was in other people's eyes. The pain did not disappear, but it became an abundant source of fuel. Each time he was tired, he remembered the feeling of hitting bottom, and that memory reminded him he had endured worse than this. Turning pain into motivation, in the Jungian spirit, is not turning suffering into blind ambition or the need to succeed to prove something. It is a shift of psychological energy. When you stop using energy to resist, complain, or deny pain, that energy is released to build a new life, changing habits, leaving an environment that no longer fits, learning to live more slowly and more honestly with yourself. Turning pain into motivation is not a journey that happens overnight. It requires time, honesty, and a great deal of patience with yourself. When you go far enough, you will realize pain does not come to destroy you. It comes to push you out of an old version that no longer fits. And like the phoenix, you do not come out of the fire untouched, but with another kind of vitality, quieter, steadier, and no longer easily extinguished. Pain, when transformed, creates a new driving force. But if that force has no steering, it can easily become impulsive, rushing forward when energized, collapsing when depleted. You may become stronger, yet still repeat old behaviors, old reactions, old decisions that you later regret. That is why, after fuel, what you need next is a steering wheel, learning to use reason to guide behavior. Number 5. Letting will guide the mind, not emotions drive behavior. Thank you for walking with me to this moment. I know the journey of learning to stand firm alone is not easy. It is quiet, often exhausting, and there are stretches where you must walk without anyone reminding you that you are doing well. The fact that you are still here, still listening to this point, shows that you are not avoiding yourself, and that you are brave enough to continue this path of inner maturation. And if what I said above has touched hidden corners of your soul, press like on this video as a way of acknowledging the journey you are on. You can also subscribe to continue accompanying me in the next videos about depth psychology and inner growth. Your support not only helps the channel grow, but also helps these contents reach more people who are quietly learning to stand firm, like you today. Right here, after all the lessons on loneliness, on pain, on self-comfort, and self-rising, we enter a decisive lesson. Letting will steer, rather than letting emotion lead. After everything you have learned, standing alone, staying silent before complaints, comforting yourself, transforming pain, there is a decisive lesson. You cannot live for long if you keep waiting until you feel inspired before you act. Inspiration is beautiful, but it is unstable. It comes when things are favorable and leaves right when you need it most. If you place your life in the hands of inspiration, you are handing the wheel to something that never promises to stay. From Carl Jung's perspective, will is not harsh forcing, but the capacity to reorganize the inner life. Will appears when a person no longer lets passing emotions decide behavior, but lets a deeper order lead. When you only work when you feel like it, you still live within the realm of the ego, where every decision revolves around the question, do I feel comfortable? But when you act, even when you do not want to, you are obeying something greater than emotion, goals, values, and the direction of your life. Emotions are like weather. Some days are sunny and you work with great drive. But there are also gloomy days, days of fatigue and emptiness that pull your mood down. If every time the sky turns bad you stop, the road will remain unfinished. Will cannot clear the clouds, but it helps you keep walking in the rain. Jung pointed out that many people lose vitality not because they are weak, but because they let emotion decide whether they continue. They begin many things and abandon many things. Each time they abandon something, they lose a little more trust in themselves. In the end, what they fear most is not failure, but beginning again. Will, in this case, is not forcing success, but not allowing yourself to retreat simply because today you do not feel interested. There is a common misunderstanding. A person with strong will is someone who is always highly determined. In reality, it is the opposite. A person with will is someone who accepts that they do not want to do it, and still does it. They do not wait for emotion to go first. They let action pull emotion behind. And very often, only after they have begun does inspiration appear, like a slow reward. Jung once said, "Freedom of will is the ability to do gladly that which I must do." Freedom is not doing what you like, but no longer being ruled by emotion in what you need to do. When you reach this point, you no longer live by the ups and downs of mood. You live by a commitment to yourself. I have seen this very clearly in a friend. There were phases when she no longer believed in her goal, no longer saw a reason to try. But she set one simple rule. Every day do one small thing related to what she had chosen, regardless of mood. Some days she did it in boredom, some days in doubt, but she still did it. After many months, what changed was not only the external result, but a very deep belief. I am not someone who quits because of emotion. Acting without relying on inspiration does not turn you into a numb machine. On the contrary, it helps you not be dragged too far by emotion. You are still sad, still tired, still bored, but you do not hand your life's decisions to those states. You will sit in the driver's seat, and emotions sit in the passenger seat. And then one day, you look back and realize the most important steps in your life did not happen when you were full of motivation, but on very ordinary days, very heavy days, very lonely days. Those days taught you a core truth. You do not need inspiration to continue. You only need not to stop. Number 6. Awakening true motivation from within. After all the silent efforts to live and work perfectly, you still walk with steady, confident steps, still disciplined and resolute on your path. Yet strangely, the outside world remains silent. Not a word of praise. No one knows. No one understands what you have been doing and are doing. Suddenly a question rises inside you. Do all the efforts I've made mean anything? This is the final lesson I want to share, that when there is no one left to lean on, you are forced to find your own light. From Carl Jung's perspective, this is a pivotal stage in psychological development. Jung believed most people live relying on external supports to sustain life energy, social roles, recognition, achievements, other people's gaze. These play an important role in the early stages of development, but if you do not learn to separate from them, you will remain dependent. When the world stops responding, you will collapse, even though you still have so much capacity inside. That is why Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." He emphasized that there comes a time when a person must shift the axis of motivation from outside to inside. Not because the world becomes meaningless, but because if the meaning of your life lies entirely in other people's hands, you will never truly be free. If the world responds with silence, people tend to deceive themselves into thinking they have become a failure because they have waited so long without receiving any signal of praise from the world. But often, that silence is simply a space you need in order to hear your own voice clearly. When no one applauds, you will ask yourself, if there were no reward, would I still do this? If the answer is yes, even reluctantly, even tiredly, then you have touched a very different level of motivation. Motivation from life values, not from emotion or recognition. Imagine your journey to find a light to lean on within your soul as the image of lighting your own torch to walk through a tunnel. When there is light around you, you only need to follow it. But when that light goes out, you cannot stand still waiting for someone else to light it for you. You must kindle the fire yourself. That flame is not big. It does not make you stand out. It is only enough to illuminate a few steps ahead. But what matters is this. It is in your hand. No one can take it. No one can put it out unless you let go. Carl Jung believed people truly mature only when they no longer need the world to confirm their existence. This does not mean you become isolated or deny society. It means you are no longer letting the world decide your worth. You do what is right not because you are praised, but because if you do not, you will betray yourself. There may be days when you still doubt yourself, days when you ask, if no one knows, am I living an invisible life? But then, if you are honest enough, you will realize, not every journey needs an audience. Some paths are born to forge inner strength, not to perform. And inner strength is formed in silence, when no one is standing beside you urging or cheering. Inner motivation is not loud or noisy. It does not make you instantly excited, but is like a river that runs slowly and deep. You do not always feel inspired from within, but you carry a strange certainty. No matter what today looks like, I will not turn my back on what I have chosen. That certainty helps you go much farther on the journeys you choose. I remember the story of someone who wrote a book for many years. He diligently wrote and revised each chapter of the manuscript with strict discipline, but it was repeatedly rejected for not matching public taste. Friends advised him to write something easier to read. There were periods when he also asked, if no one reads it, does what I'm doing still have meaning? Then at some point, he stopped sending the manuscript everywhere. He no longer wrote to be published, nor to prove he was talented. He finished that book because if he did not keep writing, he would betray his inner desire. One day, a publisher informed him that a manuscript he had previously sent had been approved and selected for publication. He said, "When I stopped trying to be recognized, people started to see me." At some point, you will understand, meaning does not always come from being seen. Sometimes, meaning lies in being able to live with yourself in silence, without shame, without emptiness, without needing to prove anything. When you reach that point, the world's silence no longer confuses you. It becomes simply an outer backdrop that no longer has the power to affect your consciousness or behavior again. If you look back on the whole journey you have just walked, you will notice something strange. The moments you thought you were weakest were precisely the moments you were being trained to become the steadiest version of yourself. Because when no one is beside you, you are forced to learn to stand up on your own. When no one soothes you, you are forced to learn to hold yourself. When no one pushes you, you are forced to learn to keep going by will. And when no one applauds, you are forced to learn to live for your own values. Maybe today you are still walking in the fog, still holding the faint lamp, still moving slowly, still sometimes wanting to stop. But remember, that lamp is not in someone else's hand. It is in yours. Each time you continue, even if it is only one small step, you are telling life, "I can be alone, but I will not give up." And one day, you will see the fog thinning. Not because someone comes to rescue you, but because you have walked far enough to meet the light again by yourself. And now, whether you are alone or not, I hope you remember one thing. You do not need anyone to walk for you. You can absolutely carry yourself through this stretch of road after fully absorbing everything shared in today's video through the profound lens of the psychologist Carl Jung.